Squares, boxes, windows, rectangles, these isolated palmar markings are protective symbols. So where they appear on the palm represent different things. Sometimes it's imprisonment, and here we've got one on the fate line as well. And perhaps the most interesting one, which I don't see very often, is one here on the first phalanx of Jupiter. So I'm going to get around to talking about squares in this palm reading, as well as pointing out who this person is and a few other things around palmar markings and features of the palm as well. So stick around and yeah, let's get to the bottom of squares in palmistry. So notice here I've kind of drawn out of the segments of the finger here. We've got BMS, and that stands for body, mind, and spirit. The three phalanges of the fingers represent this. So the third or the basal phalanges of the fingers represent the more sort of physical aspects of whatever that phalanx represents. Sometimes that's certain sort of organs of the body as well. The phalanges on the fingers represent lots of things, actually. Measurements of time as well. It's down to the context in how you're reading it, I suppose. The second phalange is our more sort of mental area, and then the first phalanx, the tip of our fingers, represents our spirit. So it's our ego, and it's things where the kind of information comes from, I suppose, and how we're relaying that information. So with the Mercury finger, the basal phalanx, the third, represents independence. The second is science and medicine and our industrious way of thinking. And the tip is persuasion. And you might be thinking, well, okay, how does independence relate to, a physical aspect? Well, Mercury is the finger of communication and expression. And we communicate and express ourselves verbally. It is only about 7%. So the rest, that's eye contact, is body language. It's physically, we, if we're athletes, if we, with gesticulation, also it's not just the way it's our tone of voice, it's the rhythm, it's stopping and starting, and as I say, it's eye contact. There's writing as well as art. There's all these ways we can express ourselves. Expressive dance, if you like. The ways we can express ourselves are endless. Even if we're creating a building, that's physical expression. All right, if we're a builder, if we're a carpenter, and so it's really quite profound. So in any case, I'm going off on one a bit here. So independence. If the third phalanx of Mercury is quite long, like this one, that shows us this person, okay, they're independent, but what does that mean? They have a high level of physical independence, I suppose. And we're looking at the left hand, so this person has sent me their left hand only, and I don't know if this is a man or a woman. I mean, it's hard to say, actually, looking at the palm and trying to figure out the sex of the palm, because a person's sex is identified through, well, how they identify, of course, but also how many male and female hormones they have, I suppose. It's not really possible to determine that through palmistry. But in the East, classically, only the left hand is read of women. I don't know the nationality of this person, but that is possible to determine through palmistry. I'm not too good at this. My mentor is exceptional at this, and he, once upon a time, was able to determine where someone comes from down to the town just by looking at the palm. And so it's looking at genetics and then narrowing things down from there. If I had to make a guess, I'd say this person is Indian. But it's it's hard to know. So the second phalanx here is on the short side, and the third is certainly the longest phalanx of Mercury. And this shows us this person is a strong communicator. Their message is something they're good at getting across. And so they're not particularly scientifically, let's just look at the gaps between the head and the heart line. It's a good length apart. So they're open-minded. The angle of the thumb here is an indication as to how open-minded they are as well. This doesn't, if it's sort of like a 90-degree angle or more or less, you've got someone who's open-minded. This person, I wouldn't say they are particularly naturally open-minded. On the other side of it, I suppose if they're too open-minded, then they're naive. So we've got some contradictory signs in the palm here, and that's normal. So the angle here suggests that this person isn't going to believe everything at face value. They are somewhat skeptical, but the distance between the head and the heart line shows that they are at the same time open-minded. And someone with a large amount of independence, so a lengthy third phalanx of Mercury, is also someone who is not naive, is not going to be cheated easily. They're not going to be misled easily. Someone with the opposite, with a very short phalanx, the third phalanx of Mercury, is someone that's tends to be more on the naive side. But as I say, always look for more than one sign when trying to determine one quality or aspect about a person. So here, overall, we've got someone who is very measured in how they absorb information. But just before we move on, the Mercury finger, notice the little kink here. You've got a bit of a kink here, and it kind of develops just around the third phalanx. And that shows a little bit, a kinky Mercury finger shows a kinky kind of nature, especially as this is, as I say, it's more physical. So this person's expression, sex is also a physical form of expression. So this person does have a little bit of a kinky nature. Now, let's move on. So I've already identified this person receives information in a very measured way. Now, this square here, let's get back to squares, is known as, and a lot of you would already know this, it's known as the teacher's square, and it's a kind of a feeling of security around information. It's a feeling of the desire to pass on information. As I say, squares are protective. How does that relate to being a teacher? As I say, it's securing information by passing it on. Now, if a sign on the palm is completely isolated, so it's not touching any other lines or no other lines are coming from somewhere else and forming and crossing over and converging, then we have something a bit more profound. It's a stronger message, it's a stronger meaning, and it's more accurate, I suppose, as well, and there's less environmental and experiences that come into play and affect and mix and merge with what that sign and meaning is, if that makes any sense at all. So what I'm trying to explain here is this square is formed out of other lines coming into effect here, and this provides a slightly different meaning. So let's go over what each one means. This is an intuition or sympathy line, and what that means is this person has an ability to understand other people's thoughts and feelings. They inherently, they're very good at sympathizing with others, with empathizing with others, and the experiences they've had in their life has allowed them to be a good listener. Counselors, I would expect, always really to have this sign on their palms. And then you've also got So let's just leave that there. Make a better one. You've also got this other line that comes in. It's a little bit higher up on Jupiter, and this is actually begins to wrap around almost, like a ring here, and it's known as the Solomon's Ring, and it's a great sign of wisdom, and it's associated with the desire to soak up sort of mystical or occult knowledge. It's a desire to learn more about the occults. And as I say, it's wisdom as well. So people with this tend to be very wise. They tend to use their wisdom in a way that helps others as well, when we have this sign of intuition, this sympathy line at play as well. And then you've also got this, interestingly, the headline starts here up on Jupiter, and this shows us someone with high morals, someone who expects highly of themselves and others, but it's also someone that has a great desire to rise quite high in life. They are ambitious, and the fact that you've got this intuition, sympathy line here, or intuition line, this Ring of Solomon, the headline, which is beginning very high up on Jupiter, and look at just how deep it is. It's a very meaningful beginning to this person's way of thinking in life. And then you've got this secondary kind of ambition that stems from this intuition, because it's an intuition line. So an upwards line rising up onto Jupiter is known as an ambition line. Sometimes it can come from the head or the lifeline, but this is more sort of coming from an experience or just their intuition alone. So it's a very strange one, this, because it's as though intuitively their ambition has come from intuition, or their intuition has come from ambition, something like this. It's very interesting. I mean, actually, this headline, it comes right up from Jupiter itself. It's very rare. So the combination of these lines here, I mean, this ambition here, it's sort of almost forming a square-like formation here, and then you've also got one here as well. So these ambitions, combined with intuition and the desire to learn about the occult, all tell us it's a story in itself of imparting this information that they're learning, which relates to intuition and the occult. And then you've got this desire to rise in life as well. It's all connected, literally. It's all part of the same picture. So what we're getting here is a picture of a person who is a teacher of, I'm thinking about the possibility of this person being a spiritual healer, but it's hard to know. I've only got the left hand. They certainly have the desire to reach a place of authority and impass this information on, their experiences as they do this. Now look at the fingers. We've got a very conic hand here overall, and the fingers are all very rounded, and in palmistry we call this conic, except for Jupiter. Jupiter's very pointed, and that again shows this desire to impass information, to impart information. And this is because Jupiter is all about ambition, authority, judgment, ego, and so the tip of Jupiter, it's the spirit. Again, it's higher than the mind, so it's our ambition, it's our ego. And someone with a pointed sort of first phalanx of Jupiter enjoys to pass on information. So we've got a teacher square, we've got this sign here, and then we've got this very curious square up here as well on the first phalanx of Jupiter. Very interesting sign, very rare sign. And this shows us that, well, first of all, let's go over what this vertical line here means, which has a hand in creating this square. The vertical line shows us someone who's very spiritual. All right, so we're already, with all these other signs as well, we're starting to come to a conclusion here. And so a very spiritual person, someone who is seeking enlightenment. It shows us someone who is religious, deeply spiritual, has an ability to express their spiritual beliefs in everyday life. So they might well sort of walk around in clothes that kind of emanate how they feel about their spirituality, if that makes sense. So, Buddhist monks might have, this sort of marking. I'm aware we've got other little ones here, but they're not quite as strong as this one here. And at the bottom of this, we've got a square. This kind of shows us, this is an interesting message. So I'll explain what the square on the first phalanx of Jupiter means. It's a very rare Palmer marking. And then I'll explain what it means, in conjunction with the vertical line. So this area of the finger represents, this is going to sound strange, represents magic, the occult, and deep fantasies. Also associated, this area, this first phalanx of Jupiter, is also associated with visions as well. And as I've explained, the square is a symbol of protection. It's a symbol of protecting against physical, financial, or emotional harm in some way. It's some sort of security. So I suppose this could be interpreted as though this person at the very foundation of their highly spiritual beliefs, they are protected. They're protected against these visions or profound spiritual beliefs, or the magic or the occult. Or you could interpret this sign as though they actually were part of some extremist cult, and they have these strong beliefs, or had, because we're looking at the left hand, and then they were protected. So perhaps they managed to get out of this environment. Perhaps they felt that they were psychically attacked, and they were guided and protected from what they felt was this. It's a difficult one to say, but given the other leanings here, and given the sign of this highly kind of ambitious nature, I think this person, if I had to take a real stab in the dark here, I would say that this person was in a very unique environment and circumstance, like a cult. They're now outside of it, and they are using their life experiences to teach others, to pass this information on, and to show others. I don't know. I could be completely wrong about that. Maybe they are some sort of spiritual guide in some way, and in fact, it could be that they are actually some sort of spiritual leader of a cult themselves, and they're actually being protected by their followers. It could be something like that. It's quite hard to say, partly because I've never come across that sort of sign before. Now, let's move on, because I'm not coming to any sort of accurate conclusion, I don't think. Squares on the inside of the lifeline are a very different meaning. They are often associated with imprisonment. Interesting, isn't it? How a square is a sign of protection, but in this circumstance, when you've got a square that runs on the inside of the lifeline, it can be often associated with imprisonment. I find it interesting because it's a square, and you think of a prison cell, and it's not, I'm just like this. I'm a very visual person. Now, as I say, it's not isolated. Other lines do come into effect. So lines that come over here from Venus are often influences from family or people very close to home. So I wouldn't interpret this necessarily. I wouldn't go around shouting that this on this person's palm means imprisonment. It doesn't necessarily. However, around about the age of 30 on the lifeline, there is a disruption, and that is corroborated on the headline as well. You can see there is a connection here. There is a disruption, and it ties in with this island here, this time of great stress. This is a very interesting individual, and I'm wondering what exactly happened here. So someone close to home had a profound effect, created a bit of an obstacle for this person, and looks like they got in a spot of bother at this time. And as I say, it could well be imprisonment. Now, the thing I find most interesting, there's quite a strong horizontal line like this. This is quite interesting because does it stem from inner Mars? So the palm can be separated into 4 quadrants, and this first quadrant here represents our ivory tower. It's how we express and expose ourselves to the world. It's how we reveal ourselves to the world. I mean, it's a combination of Apollo and Mercury, and this is our expression and communication. So that's the revealing side, and also Apollo being our talents and the way we others see us shine, and it's also the sunshine in our lives as well. So it's starting to cross over into a more internal aspect, but it's still how we put ourselves on show, and it's our reputation as well. It's our vanity, and it's aesthetics is what we find beautiful, and how others see us as well. So it's our first quadrant of the palm here is what's on show to everybody else, and how this horizontal line here relates to what I've just said. So we don't see this completely here, but when we have, so for example, a line that comes from Venus, so that it says it comes from the family ring and it crosses right over every single aspect: life, head, heart, career, the sun line, and it's reaching over and it's coming over into our first quadrant. This is a life-changing event that is put on show, creates an obstacle in all areas of our life. Everybody knows about it. There's often, it's a massive obstacle, so it's often a negative experience, and it shows, sort of shame, guilt, regret, and other kind of negative feelings as well. And often it's associated with betrayal. You could refer to this line as a change line. It's far more accurate to call it something like that than a betrayal line, because it could mean several things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is to blame for whatever change this is. It could be someone else that's having this effect on this person. But this is just an example, because this line, it actually comes over from more a Jupiter area, and it's sort of suggesting that it's a tricky one here, because it's not fully coming from inner Mars, which is a place of motivation and aggression and drive. It's coming from more or less sort of in between Jupiter and Saturn, which is, again, it's ambition. So there is drive involved here, but it's also work and doing the right thing. So it's interesting that this obstacle comes from a place of duty, let's say, because we're going in between Jupiter and Saturn here, and it crosses over the career and emotions, and it's interfering with success as well and happiness, and it's putting us on display. We're being held accountable in all these aspects. What we've already discovered, and putting this into some sort of context here, it's possible that this person was revealed to be perhaps fraudulent in their activities, or this is a really tricky one. Let's go with this kind of. So, if we're going with this theory that this person was in a cult, for example, and then they came out of it, maybe they felt shame about this, and they kind of felt like everyone knew their business. That would explain this sort of line here. It would come into contact with their, emotions and their career and their success. So, interestingly, there's a square here formed at the time that this, it becomes an obstacle. It's hard to know what this means. Perhaps their finances were protected at this time. Perhaps they had assistance from family when they were coming out, so to speak. This is a really tricky one. So this square here is part of this convergence. So and where this is affecting this person is early 40s to late 50s. So this entire episode here, it could well be lasting for a sort of 5-year period where they are adjusting to life after a big change. Now let's look for how this relates. Let's look for corroborating evidence. Now, the best way to do this would be to look at the right hand. We don't have that. So the lifeline shows us that as I say, the age of around about 30, just after this difficult spell where someone close to home kind of has an influence around a negative experience in their life, there's this sort of lifeline kind of veers away here, and it's sort of showing that this person may have gotten out of their environment at this time, and also the fate line here, or the career line, it changes direction. There's a fork in the road. There's several forks in the road really here for this person. So it could be that around about the age of 30-ish or so, 35 as well. So there's big changes for this person, 30 to 35. It affected their finances, but they had some support and guidance around this. And you can see that the career line is sort of cut off by these circumstances here, look. But they begin anew after this point, or after around 36 or so, maybe even a bit later than that. And then these other obstacles don't quite have the same effect on the career after this time. The obstacles themselves almost appear to create opportunities. In any case, as we can see from the headline, this large island here, 30s, was a very difficult time for them. And I'm not using the headline as a measurement of time. We can see how the lifeline corroborates that conclusion. So it's possible that in their 30s they got out of this environment, whatever it was they were in. But in their early 40s to early 50s, there is also a great need for protection, and it's there around whatever exposure this is to their lifestyle. And I don't know what it is exactly. Now, as I've mentioned, the isolated Palmer markings are far more profound, but sometimes when, so in this case, we've got here the sun line, this change line, the career line, and then the girdle of Venus, all kind of form a square by the convergence of these lines. So it's interesting because although it doesn't mean that there's any one particular specific meaning of protection here, it's like an overall, these things come together and provide a bit of protection. So You could say that the success or their finances in some way protect the career or vice versa, which makes perfect sense. It's kind of obvious. We work for money, not just the achievements. And then this change that comes into play, it could be said that this great change that affects both career and the ability to make money or be happy forms the need for protection. And then the girdle of Venus, which is most interesting because it's quite sort of fragmentary. Their sexual psychological makeup may have been damaged at quite a young age. This is also evident by, as I say, the low set Mercury finger, likely a lack of a father figure, and quite a strong desire to sexually express themselves. Also, we've got some deep islands here all along the heart line, and this shows it shows the possibility for extramarital relations, affairs, a lack of emotional focus, but also, physically speaking, it could be a heart issue because the girdle of Venus, it doesn't just show us so the girdle of Venus, it shows us our emotional, it's an indicator for emotions, how we sense and perceive others, but also fragmentary girdle of Venus like this can show some leanings towards unhealthy kind of sexual nature, because a healthy girdle of Venus is one that's just sort of fully formed, or even one that's, just a bit broken. But one like this that's quite sort of fragmented, it can show that there is a lack of focus around sexual discipline. And sometimes it's associated with even criminal nature. And an intuition line or a sympathy line that reaches up and touches the heart line, which this one does, can also indicate a desire to influence others emotionally. I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, because counselors have this, and it can be used for good. It can be a power used for healing. If you look very closely here at the headline, now you've got this island here. And after this time of great upheaval, there's appears to be a line that decides to rise upwards. And this line also, well, you've got one, and it rises up because it's almost as though after this time of great upheaval and stress or depression, it's poor mental health, certainly poor mental strain, on this person. After this time, it's almost like an epiphany, and you've got this. It's like a secondary career line. It's like this idea of what it is they want to do. It's an ambition line, is what it is, really. Because it rises up here, crosses over the heart line, and it starts to rise up in between here. And it's this very idealistic ambition, an epiphany after this very difficult, mentally straining time. And it sort of converges with this intuition or sympathy line. So it's almost like this idea about how to emotionally influence others as part of their ambition. We've already discovered they're a very spiritual and religious person, interest in the occult, ability to teach. And if we look down here as well at Neptune, we can see the bridge is gapped here. We've got a well-developed bridge of Neptune. This is someone with the ability to influence others, captivate, hold an audience. I mean, a lot that's written about the girdle of Venus, and a lot of it needs to be downplayed actually, because it is quite, especially in older texts, it's always seen as a negative thing. Really, this is an emotional barometer. So someone with the girdle of Venus has higher emotional intelligence. But a girdle of Venus that's not very well formed, or has some issues there, that's not as healthy as it could be, it shows us that this person has some work to do on themselves. I suppose there's some damage there, and they need to heal themselves. So perhaps by healing others, if they are in fact some sort of healer, and most teachers are in some way, then perhaps they're healing others in order to heal themselves. Projection. In any case, this, whatever this is, this event, this change line, this exposure, because it lands up on this first quadrant, is protected by their emotional barometer, by their ability to understand the emotions of others, and it's also protected by their either their financial success or their happiness and their career as well. So I think there's some protection and guidance from others at this time that understand them, because they themselves understand them. Now there's another very interesting feature in the palm here. Look at the family ring. And we see here a large island. This indicates one child, but then we've also got the possibility here for 2, then 3, maybe even 4 children. And this first one's a deep and impactful member of the family. And if we look here, this is what's known as a loyalty line. And this loyalty line is joined up by what looks like a second family ring. Fascinating, isn't it? All this talk of the occult and cults as well. And we've got this second family, and they're loyal to the second family, it seems. Absolutely fascinating. Now, there's a desire here to have a career with an audience, or work with others closely, because we've got a career line that stems from Luna. And it's a desire because it's the left hand. This is how we're affected internally. And the headline is drooping right down here. It forks as well. A fork this long it shows us someone with a deep ability to see things from many angles. And a headline that droops this low down like this and begins to weaken like this shows that this mental strain could well have been depression, and they're probably quite susceptible to this depression. And it's likely because of just how sensitive this person is. And that sensitivity, it also has to do with everything else we've talked about. Their interest in the occult, their need to be protected around, for lack of a better word, this unseen energy. And I wonder if they are, in fact, if they are some sort of spiritual healer and they're constantly exposed to, negative feelings. Perhaps that's what the need is for that protection. Now, the fingers themselves, they represent a lot of things. As I may have mentioned, they represent the months of the year. And when we see lines like this, they show obstacles within the month of that year. Here's a little nugget for you if you've managed to watch to the end of this video here. You're in for a little treat. because this is a gem of information, often forgotten part of palmistry. This was the month of August. They've gone through at the latter part of the month of August, so the month just been at the time of this video. They've gone through a large obstacle in their life. Maybe it's around this. I don't know the age of this person. However, I can say that September, October, November, just at the end of November, there will be another obstacle they will go through again. It won't be quite as bad as what they went through in August, but it's there. And this is what the palm is showing us internally. So it's more about how they're going to be affected mentally and emotionally. So I don't think we have someone who is dishonest here because of the loyalty line, because I don't see that so much with the Mercury finger. If the Mercury finger was crooked from the mind aspect of the finger, I would be a bit more worried. Or if in fact persuasion was a bit more, it's straight. So I'm not too worried there. Apollo and Saturn tend to lean towards each other, and it shows consideration towards others. And this is in line with, this possible healing aspect of the palm here. And we've also got these 3 lines up here, and that's known as the healing stigmata. So I'm not too concerned we've got someone, a criminal on our hands. I mean, I mentioned possible imprisonment, and with talk about, the girdle of Venus and emotional manipulation, not manipulation, but influence. So it's a very tricky one, this, a very complex read. I think we have here some sort of person who is a spiritual healer, very into the occult, and has needed some protection. They've gotten themselves in deep, and I think they've had to drastically change their environment. You can see the lifeline here trailing off and almost starting anew, and the career of their fate is very complex and has taken many twists and turns. So this is a very intuitive and instinctive individual, and probably a little bit psychic. They are a teacher and potentially a healer. So I hope you've enjoyed this video mainly on squares in palmistry. I hope it's shed some light on what squares mean in palmistry, and I hope you've learned a little bit about palmistry in general as well. Bit of a complex read, and I've been learning as I've gone along as well. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.